Hey, welcome back to Tech Teardown. My name is Steve, and today this is a video I've been waiting to do ever since I started my channel. We're about to show you how to build a mini ITX build. And mini ITXs are great little tiny PCs that have multiple applications. You can either build a gaming PC, which is what I'm going to do here, but it could also be used for home theater PCs, or also known as HTPCs. Now, before we start building, I'm going to go over all the parts that I chose and give you a little description of why I chose them. Now, for the case, I went with the NZXT H200 Mini ITX case. I love NZXT cases, and they just announced a whole bunch of refreshed lines of these types of cases at Computex, so I'm really looking forward to using those in the future. And I've used several other NZXT cases in previous build videos before. If you are a beginner, NZXT is a great case to get you started. Now, the NZXT H200 does support a full-size ATX power supply. Most mini ITX cases do not. They do support usually a small form factor or SFX power supply. So if you are looking to build a mini ITX computer, when you're buying your case, make sure it supports either a full-size ATX or an SFX power supply before you buy your other parts. The power supply that I went with is a full-size ATX power supply from Seasonic. This is a 620 watt power supply, 80 plus bronze, and it's fully modular. Fully modular means that you can pick and choose what cables that you want to use on the power supply, so you're not having just random cables that you don't need just sitting in your case. Now, the processor I've been waiting to use ever since I started the channel, here's this new i5 9400F. The F means that they took out the integrated graphics out of the chips that most Intel processors use nowadays. The 9400F is a great little budget processor from Intel. Intel processors usually come at a premium, and you can compare this 9400F usually to a Ryzen 5 2600, and they're roughly the same price. The only thing you lose on this processor compared to a Ryzen 5 2600 is the 2600 has hyperthreading. This one does not. But since some games don't really support hyperthreading, you shouldn't lose much performance going with this one. And I got this on a super awesome deal at Micro Center for $140. And when I paired it with my motherboard, which I got the MSI B360, the B360 also does not support overclocking. I got $30 off when I paired the processor with a compatible motherboard at Micro Center. So that's why every time I build a computer, I go to Micro Center for my processors and my motherboards. Now, for the graphics card, I also went with another MSI product. This is their Gaming X GTX 1660. This graphics card can be had for about $250. And typically, I don't recommend buying a graphics card that is at a premium like this, because you can overclock any graphics card, the lower end graphics card versions, to perform just like this one. So you can get a $220 GTX 1660 and you can make it perform just as well as this one. The only thing you're paying for on this premium version of the GTX 1660 is a factory overclock and RGB. I went with this one because I think it looks amazing. It's going to look really nice in the NZXT H200. But if you're looking to lower your price, you can either go for a budget used graphics card. You can get a GTX 1070 used on eBay for about the same price I paid for this 1660, or even less. And the GTX 1070 would probably even perform better than this one. So don't throw out the used market completely. But everything in this build is going to be brand new. Now, for the CPU cooler, I went with the NZXT Kraken M22. It's a 120 millimeter radiator. It's an all-in-one liquid cooler. Now, Asetek, a brand that makes a lot of AIO pumps and reservoirs, they claimed a patent on the pump block combo, and most coolers now have to switch to their own design or they get sued by Asetek unless they're using Asetek pump block combos. So NZXT, to get around that, they came up with their own design, and for this cooler, they had put the pump on the radiator, which kind of worries me and offers lots of different points of failure. But for only $60, I had to go ahead and try this cooler. Now, for the RAM, or the memory as it's also known as, I found this on an awesome deal. This is the RGB Corsair Vengeance Pro. This is 16 gigabytes, has two 8 gigabyte sticks at 3000 megahertz. It does support XMP, and with the RGB, I think this is going to look really awesome. I got this on an awesome deal from Newegg for $90. Actually, in fact, I got it from Best Buy, but because Best Buy price matches Newegg, I was able to get the Newegg price at $90. This typically runs for about $110 normally. All right, and then for the case fans, finally, I went with this 3-pack of Up Here RGB fans. Now they're high airflow fans. I was looking specifically for high static pressure fans to put at the front of this case to offer more cooling for the graphics card. But I couldn't find any that were really cost effective. So hopefully these high airflow fans don't really impede or cause any problems for the cooling of the graphics card. We will see later on in the future. Now these Up Here fans are RGB. They connect to their own RGB fan hub, and they are powered by Molex, so you can't really control the speeds of the fans. All right, and finally for our boot drive, I went with this Inland 240GB SSD. You can get these either on Amazon or at Micro Center for about $27. They're a great little SSD to start you off at for your boot drive. This can hold on Windows 10, and you can hold a couple games on there. Later on, you will want to upgrade and add a 1 terabyte, maybe a mechanical drive to hold all your games on. You definitely don't want to fill this SSD up when you have Windows 10 on there. All right, guys, so that's all the parts that I've chosen. So let's go ahead and start building. All right, so building a gaming PC, I do recommend a anti-static mat just like the one I have. You don't have to use it, just please don't build on carpet just to avoid any points of failure. I've built many PCs on carpet before and never had issues, but I'm not going to tell you that it's okay to do that. So starting off building a PC, first thing I like to do is take the motherboard out and put it on top of the box that it came on. A good manufacturer will keep their motherboard in an anti-static bag like MSI did with this one. And this is our motherboard. So for the first thing that we want to do is we're going to install the processor. To install the processor, we are going to want to unlatch this lock here and lift up, and we'll pull this down. And here is your motherboard. You want to be careful of these pins. If they bend, you're screwed. And before I start building, I like to check and make sure none of the pins have been bent, and this one does look good. Also, leave this black little thing here on there. It'll pop off as soon as you install the processor. And the Intel i5-9400 is right here. You don't want to touch these gold pads that are right here. Now, typically, I like to recommend that you line the triangle on the processor with the triangle that is on the motherboard. So this one, I don't actually see a triangle on the motherboard anywhere. So what you would do next is follow the notches on the processor. There are little notches, and you want to line those up with the notches on the motherboard. Now, you want to be very careful setting this into the motherboard. Should just be able to drop it right in place, like so. Now you can go ahead and lower this, and you can go ahead and lower the retention arm. And as you can see, it popped off that plastic thing. Also, for this plastic thing here, you do want to make sure you keep this just in case there are problems with the motherboard. You will need this in order to return the motherboard. Now, we're going to go ahead and install the RAM. All right, this is one of your RAM sticks, and mind the notch here. You want to line the notch up with the notch on the motherboard here. Now, to install the RAM, you want to pull back on these tabs. See, if I look right here, the notch on the RAM is not lined up with the notch on the motherboard. So we have to flip it this way, and as you can see, it is now lined up. So you want to slide it in carefully. All right, and then give it a nice push with both thumbs on each side until you hear that snap. Then we'll do the next one. Perfect. Now notice that I've installed everything outside of the case so far. Now we're going to go ahead and move it into the case. I find it much easier to do these parts outside of the case first. Typically, if you have an air cooler, depending on how big it is, it might also be recommended to do that outside of the case. But because we have a radiator and a AIO pump, I'm doing that inside of the case. All right, to get started, first I'm going to take off these thumb screws that are holding on the side panel. Try to keep a thumb on here just in case it might fall off, because this is tempered glass and it can shatter. So be careful when you're taking these thumb screws off. And NZXT has fixed this design on their upcoming cases, where they're going to have a thumb screw up here, just like on their NZXT H200. So that way it will be a lot easier to take this off. Now that we have the side panel off, we're going to go ahead and put this to the side. Make sure you keep your thumb screws in a place where you know where they are so you don't lose them. Now I'm going to take the back panel off, and these are just thumb screws you just want to loosen, and then this pops right off, and we're going to put this off to the side. Here is the back of the case. Notice that NZXT includes these nice little cable routing to make your cable management nice and clean, and it even has this Velcro strap to pin them down. That's one of the reasons why I love NZXT, because they do include this on very budget-friendly cases. Remember, I only picked up this NZXT H200 for about $65. The NZXT H500 also has these SSD mounts right behind the motherboard. More cable routing here off on the side. Now, we're going to go ahead and take this little box off here. This is just a twist tie. Go ahead and remove that and throw that out. And this little box has all the case screws that you're going to need. When you're installing the motherboard, you are going to want to make sure you use the screws that the case came with, just to make sure that you're not going to be cross-threading. This is the I/O shield for the motherboard. You're going to want to make sure it's all lined up with the I/O on the motherboard itself. And this is what we're going to install first into the case. So we put it in here. Be careful with these side edges. Sometimes they can be sharp depending on the case. This case, not so bad. These I/O shields can also be sharp as well. This one, not so much. So this here, now these can be a little bit tricky. Just want to get it lined up and push in. There you go. That was probably my fastest I/O shield I've ever done. Now that we have the I/O shield installed, we can now flip over the case on its back so we can install the motherboard. So actually, before I put in the motherboard, what I'm going to do is go ahead and remove the included case fans, because I'm not going to actually use them, and they'll just be in our way when we're installing the motherboard. Notice here in the NZXT H200, it comes with pre-installed standoffs for your motherboard, and that's where you're going to screw the motherboard in. So here is our motherboard. We're going to go ahead and set it in, lining it up with not only the standoffs, but also the I/O shield. Everything looks lined up here. All right, and remember, the NZXT H200 came with this box with a bunch of hardware for your computer case. Here you have your front I/O power switches, the screws we're going to need to install the motherboard, and some dip ties to help you with cable management. Now notice here that the NZXT box came with several different screws, so make sure you refer to your manual which ones are meant to screw the motherboard in. These screws right here, 632 screw flat, these are the ones we're going to need to use for our motherboard installation. Now any screwdriver will do, but I do highly recommend a magnetic screwdriver like this one from iFixit. This is the one I use every time I'm installing motherboards or just anything really, because it is magnetic. It makes it a lot easier to get those screws installed, but any screwdriver really can do, as long as it's the right size so you're not cross-threading. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get our power supply installed. Here is our power supply. This is the Seasonic M22. And when you're working with a fully modular power supply, the first thing you want to do before you put it into the case is choose which cables you know you're going to need to use. So we know we're going to use the motherboard, so we'll need that. We also know we'll need the CPU and a PCIe for your graphics card. And then we're also going to need some SATAs and peripherals for our SSD, as well as we'll have a Molex connector for those case fans. With this particular power supply, Seasonic gives you a nice bag that has all the cables in it. Here we have our PCI Express that we're going to need for our graphics card. Here is where we're going to need for the here's the cable we need to give power to the processor, and this is our 24 pin for the motherboard. Right here are the cables we'll need to power the SSDs with the SATA, and here is where we're going to plug in for the peripherals, has the Molex that we're going to use to power the case fans. All right, so first I'm going to install the 24 pin one. Now here you notice it has the motherboard, so and then you notice this notch here on there and that notch there, so that way you know it's going to go in this way. And then for this particular power supply, they have this extra motherboard cable, also labeled right here, motherboard. And notice the notch and the notch. You plug that in. All right, now we're all ready to go to plug in. We'll be ready to plug in the 24 pin. Notice here for the Molex, it only has a 6-pin connector, and we're going to plug that 6-pin connector into one of these peripheral 6-pin connectors, also lining up the notch with the notch on the power supply, like so. Now for the SATA that's going to be powering our SSD, this also is a 6-pin, and SATA is marked on the power supply. Line the notch up again. There we go. So now we are going to plug in the CPU cord. Notice here that they're both 8 pins. So this cable is marking where this is the one that you go into the power supply unit. This is the one that goes to the motherboard. All right, notice here it does say CPU. So we have the notch, plug it into the notch. All right, and for the graphics card power cables, you notice it has the power supply marker on there, so that you know this one gets plugged into the power supply, and these two will get plugged into the graphics card if it has 2 power connectors. All right, and as you can see here, PCIe. So line up the notch, and it's plugged in. So now we can go ahead and install the power supply into the case. Notice I've moved these cables out of the way. Notice down here at the bottom of the case where the power supply is going to go, there is an air vent there. And that means we are going to want the fan facing down. So we're going to go ahead and slide this in. All right, during installation, I noticed that this does come with a bracket for SFX power supply. Because we don't have an SFX power supply, I went ahead and removed that. So now you just slide the power supply in, and we're going to use these power supply case screws that the case came with to install. All right, so now we have our power supply installed to the case. Now the next step is to get these cables routed to where they need to go on the inside of the case. So we know first here that this motherboard cable is going to need to go through here. We go ahead and route that through. And while that's routed, we're going to go ahead and get that put into place. All right, as you can see, here is where the 24 pin needs to go. And there's a little place for the notch, which here is our notch. So we're gonna get this all bent up to where it's gonna fit in there. Or actually, I'm putting it the wrong way. So we're gonna bend up this way. Don't be afraid to bend it. All right, now we got the 24 pin installed. Now we can route the 8 pin for the CPU up here. All right, so I have the cable routed through. Notice the notch here, it's gonna go like so. All right, notice that I have it installed and I've tucked it back here. All right, so the next step is I'm gonna go ahead and install the case fans. We'll do the one on the top and the back here first. Then we're gonna go ahead and do the radiator installation next. Now the first thing I'm gonna do to install the case fan is get it routed up here through this little cable clip right here, and then get it through that hole to already start managing the cables on the fan. Here are the case screws that you need to screw in fans. All right, so installing the top fan had a little bit of difficulties because we had to get it past this heat sink. So there was a little bit of a problem there. These fans might be too thick. So bear that in mind if you are going to try to replicate this build. Now it's time to install our all-in-one liquid cooler for our processor. To do that, we need to remove this front panel. All right, so don't be afraid to break it. It is meant for being pulled off here. This is your front panel. All of your airflow is coming from this side here and these holes right here. All right, here is our all-in-one liquid cooler. This is the CPU block, the infinity mirror, and it has RGB. Looks like it does come with pre-applied thermal paste. I am going to remove that and replace that with a thermal paste I prefer. Here is the radiator that the CPU block is attached to. And right here is that pump that I told you about is attached to the radiator. Or actually right here it is. This is the pump. And then NZXT does include a fan for the radiator. This doesn't look exactly high static pressure, which is definitely needed for a good configuration on a radiator. All right guys, this is your back plate that's going to go behind your motherboard, and these screws here are your standoffs for the cooler. This right here just kind of goes into that slot. This right here is your M2 screw, and that is going to go right here onto each one of the standoffs to keep them in place. We'll put the M.2 screw here. We do it here on all four. Now bear in mind this bracket here, what we're using right now is for the socket 1151 that we're using. These here are for AMD. All right, so I have them all screwed in. Now it's time to put them in through the back of the motherboard and out this way. All right, so to install this, we are going to have to remove this SSD tray. And that just folds backwards, so that's pretty nice. Here are our spacers, and we just put them down like so. All right, now it's time to install the CPU water block. First thing we're going to do is remove this plastic, and then we're going to remove this thermal paste. So I'm going to grab a paper towel and some alcohol. All right, so I prefer this MX4. It's one of my favorite thermal pastes. So we're going to put just a pea-sized drop onto the IHS. Notice I did almost a little bit bigger than a pea size. It's a little bit, probably a little bit too much for what we need, but that should be fine anyway. So it does usually bug me when someone installs it where the NZXT logo is upside down or whatever. So I am going to make sure that this one is right side up. And we're going to go ahead and set this in. Now we have this installed. One thing I forgot to mention is this cooler did come pre-installed with the Intel bracket. The AMD bracket, you would have had to take the Intel bracket off and install the AMD bracket on the CPU block. Next, they want us to install these washers on each standoff. Then we install these with the screws with the springs on them over on top of the washers. Now we're going to screw them in like we would a car tire screw, where we do 1, 2, 3, 4, or you can start here and go here, 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 here. Just got to do it crisscross. So you first just start them off. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you want a magnetic screwdriver handy. All right, so now that we got these thumb tight, now we can go ahead and tighten them down with the screwdriver. And I got them all tightened down. I'm just gonna go through them one more time just to make sure there's no more cranking that can be done. Just make sure you don't over tighten. All right, so we are good on the block. Now we're gonna go ahead and get the radiator installed. I think I'm gonna put it right here maybe, or maybe like this. All right, one thing I should have done before I installed the CPU block, so learn from my mistakes, is this connector that's going to go to the motherboard. It's a USB 2.0 header. This here gets plugged into the water block, which is going to be down here in the behind. So it is going to be a little bit of pain for me to install it now. So learn from my mistake, and if you're doing this yourself, make sure that you install this first before you put the block onto the motherboard. All right, so before I install the radiator, actually, I'm going to install this fan here at the bottom as an intake fan. To be an intake fan, we want the NZXT symbol with the purple sticker on the inside of the case. To install the fans and the radiator in the front, we are going to need to remove these 4 screws that are holding in the dust. All right, so we've taken the dust filter off, and now we have our brackets to mount the fans to. So we just line the holes up and install. All right, so they're installed. Notice here that the fan is installed on the inside of the bracket. Now we are going to go ahead and install the radiator into the bracket. This is the fan for the radiator. This is going to be installed first, like so. And then this is a screws particular for the fan and the radiator. So we are going to install that like this. So this radiator radiator screw is going to go through the fan, and then you have just a little bit left to go into the radiator. Now you do want to be very, very careful when you're screwing in these radiator screws. You do not want it to puncture the radiator. That'll be really bad. All right, so we have the radiator and its front fan installed. I am, remember, going to be doing a push-pull configuration. So I'm going to get the other fan installed on this side. Before I do that though, we want to get these cables routed out of the way. All right, also I did go ahead and put the dust filter back on. Now we can install the front panel again. You're good there. All right, now, because these are not high static pressure fans, I used the fan that the radiator came with to do the pushing. This one, since it's only high airflow, I'm going to use that as the puller, and it's going to go this way to do the pulling with the Up Here logo on the inside. And then we will also be using the radiator screws for this fan. All right, for the fan hub, this gets plugged in right here. Here's your Molex connector. Now, these fans have 5-pin connectors, and we're just going to connect them here. Now, to connect the Molex connector from the fan hub, this has a port. You see you have the male here, and there's a female on the back here. So when you flip that over, and from the power supply, it is a male. Give it as much pushing as you need. Molex connectors are a little bit frustrating to get in. All right, there it is. So don't give up on it. Molex connectors are really frustrating and hard to get in. All right, and this little 3-pin header is coming from the radiator itself, and you're going to plug this on the motherboard where it says CPU optional, or if you have a different motherboard, it might say AIO pump. All right, guys, so I have pretty much everything in here. I have all 4 fans plugged in. 1, 2, actually 5 fans. This NZXT fan and this NZXT fan are all plugged in on the motherboard. And then the radiator is plugged in on the motherboard up here at top. Now, before we install the graphics card, we are going to want to install the front I/O cables like the USB 3, the SATAs, and the power switch, all of that. We want to install that first and then the power supply. So let's go ahead and get those cables plugged in first. So I've already routed everything I need. Here's your USB 3.0, here's your HD audio, and here's your front panel. Now this is something awesome that NZXT does. If you have an Intel motherboard, it is already lined up to fit right on the front I/O connectors on the motherboard. If you were to have an Intel, then you would have to connect this little adapter on here and then connect it like you normally would with these little tiny LEDs. So for Intel, you have this just nice little easy connector to plug right on in there. All right, first off, for USB-C, take note of the notch and then the notch on the port where it goes into. So that is done. Now here is our HD audio. Take note of this missing hole, and for the HD audio, take note of the missing pin. All right, take note. So when you're usually installing a normal ATX power supply, usually the front panel connectors are usually down here, but take note that on this MSI motherboard, they are right here. All right, and bear in mind here, this is your SATA cable or your data cable for your SSD. Now, you want to see that there are this groove here that goes down. And see how that does that notch here on the motherboard. So you plug that in here, and then you can route that into the back where your SSD will be. All right guys, for your SSD, you're gonna use these screws. These are the M35 flats. This also came in that box from NZXT. For the SSD, I am going to install it with the data and the SATA power cables facing down. You can do it however you think is going to be the best for routing. And then, so you have to take this little bracket off, and then you just line up these holes like this, and then you screw it in. So here is your data cable again that we routed through the back. Plug that in like so. And here is our power cable. Power cable, you can see, has that little notch. You line up with that notch right here. Plug it in. Now, you take these little two lines and line them up with the grooves here in the back here. And we go down, push it back in. So our SSD is now installed. Now to get to the graphics card and get it installed, we need to first remove these screws. All right, so I just slid that back. Now we need to remove these screws. Now that we have the screws out, we need to take out these PCIe brackets, these things here. Make sure you save these screws because you're going to need them. Here is our graphics card. This is it. This thing is going to light up, that'll light up, and look at that amazing little backplate. Nice aluminum finish. This is a good looking card. So we want to remove this. As you can see, we're only going to need one 8-pin here. This is the dust cover for the PCIe. You want to remove that. All right, so for NZXT, what they want you to do, this is like a stand for the GPU, almost like an anti-sag bracket. Now, what we need to do is find a place on this case that we can plug it in where it's not hitting any fans. So what they want us to do is plug this in first. So we're going to line this notch up with this notch right here. We're also going to be careful not to scrape the motherboard with these little fins here. And those are going to slide in right along that PCI bracket that we removed. Now you hear that snap? So we might have to remove this power cable and route it up this way in order for it to not hit the fans underneath the graphics card. So we're going to do that as well. First, we need to figure out where we can put this to where it's not hitting any fans. I think right about here would be nice. That's about lined up with the M.2. So what you have to do now is go ahead and remove the PCI or the graphics card. To do that, you want to pull back on that tab or push it down again and then pull out. Now we install this. There we go. That is our GPU stand. Now let's go ahead and route this back down and get it up this way. All right, so we have the cable routed a different way. We have the GPU stand plugged in. Now we have to just get this graphics card plugged in one last time. All right, as you can see, the GPU stand is not hitting any fans and it's propping up that graphics card pretty nice. Now to install the graphics card power cable, you have to line that up, and this notch is gonna go up top for this particular graphics card anyway. And there you go, tuck that down in there. Make sure it's not hitting any of the case fans. Now we have to put these screws back on. And this locks in the graphics card into place. All right, now we got that screwed in. Now we just put in this locking mechanism and screw back in. All right, now we're just getting prepared for booting. Next step is just to peel all the plastic that might be on here. First, what I know that is there is on the CPU cooler. So that is done. You want to check your graphics card just to see if there's any extra plastic on there. Looks like we're good there. We should be good to go ahead and get started to boot. All right, now for the moment of truth, we need to first flip on the power supply switch, turn on our monitor, and we got our RGB on our graphics card, our RGB RAM, our RGB CPU cooler, RGB fans, they're all lit up. All right, now all that we have left to do is install Windows, which I have on a USB stick, and we're gonna go ahead and plug that in, get Windows installed, and start testing some games. All right, guys, I did make one mistake, and I just want to point it out so you guys can learn from me. I wasn't looking when I was installing the fan, and I actually installed it the wrong way. It is actually on the rear fan here, it's set up as an intake right now. It should be set up as an exhaust fan. So I will have to flip them around. I knew something was up when I saw that the rubber grommets that I put on here were facing on the inside. I only installed them on the ones that I was going to install that were going up against the case. And I'm pretty sure that's why these fans are running quite loud right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and flip that around. So next time you see it, it'll be an exhaust. All right. So now I have Windows 10 installed, Google Chrome installed. So now what we have to do is download all the Windows updates, and then we have to download the NVIDIA drivers. So we're going to look up on NVIDIA's website for the drivers for the GTX 1660, and then we're also going to look for like the chipset drivers and everything else on MSI's website for the motherboard. So we'll be back after we get all of those installed. All right, so here we are in the MSI BIOS. This one's really easy. All we need to do is turn on XMP, and it's right here. As soon as you get into the BIOS, XMP says it's off. You want to turn that on, and that is going to boost up our RAM to the 3000 megahertz speed that we want. All right, you just finished building, you finished testing all of your games. Congratulations, you just finished building your very first gaming PC, or maybe your very first ITX PC. Now, whether or not you're going to be using this for HTPC, gaming, editing, this is going to be a great gaming PC, or just PC in general for you. Even streaming, this GTX 1660 does support that brand new NVENC encoder from NVIDIA, so you can use that so you can stream, and that 9400F 6 cores and 6 threads is going to be just fine when you are going to be streaming. Now for the NZXT cooler I have here mounted on the front with the push-pull configuration, so far temperatures have been great. I have the NZXT CAM software up here. Right now the CPU is at 28 degrees Celsius. It's not doing anything right now. Typically this idle temperatures are around that, maybe a little bit lower. But it is still kind of cooling down after I did a whole bunch of loops of the Hitman 2 benchmark over and over again with a closed case to get closed case temperatures. During that benchmark loop, which I ran for about 45 minutes straight over and over again, that game benchmark, I saw the highest CPU temperature at 45 degrees Celsius. Right now the GPU at idle, it is also still cooling down. It is at 47 degrees Celsius. Typically it's around 35 to 38 at idle. During that benchmark loop for about 45 minutes on a closed case, the GPU was at about 69 was the highest I saw, but it really stayed more at between 66 and 68 was the sweet spot after about a while of running the benchmark. So the temperatures are really great, and I'm really happy with NZXT with adding the extra ventilation sides on each side of the case. They did a really great job of managing the thermals with this case. As for these fans, up here fans, you get 3 for $25 on Amazon, full RGB. You control it with this little RF remote, control different colors, different modes that you can set it. I like it on auto here. It starts off with this rainbow color, and then it just sorts through all the different lighting modes that you have to choose from on this remote. Now the fan noise, if you are concerned about fan noise at all, this might not be the best. These might not be the best fans for you to choose because they are powered by Molex and you can't control the speeds. So they are on full blast at all times. So fan noise is an issue for you, whether or not it's a HTPC for you or a streaming PC. You might want to go with some more expensive fans, something that will be a lot quieter for you. Or if you don't care about the RGB, just stick with the NZXT case fans that it comes with. Those will be just fine. Now this gaming PC cost me about $850 to build this. Now, it does cost around $900 to $950 to build it if you're not near a micro center. I am near a micro center, so I was able to get a lot of these parts a lot cheaper than you can anywhere else. So I paid $850. You might have to pay about $950 for a gaming PC like this. All right, guys, I love this PC, and I've told you in the beginning that this is the one PC that I've been wanting to build ever since I started my channel. If you're as enthusiastic about ITX or PC building as I am, sound off down in the comments and let me know what you thought of this PC. If you have any plans for building your own ITX build or just a gaming computer in the future, let me know if anything in my tutorial was at all confusing, or if I didn't answer any questions that you had about building a gaming PC. I'm here to answer your questions, so please don't be afraid to ask. I would love to hear from you guys, whether or not you just have comments about the build, suggestions for future videos or for improving our videos, or if you just have comments or questions about building a gaming PC if I haven't answered them already in this tutorial or in our Ryzen build tutorial up here. Now, building in an ITX case like this, very few differences between this and an ATX case. ATX, you're going to have a whole bunch more connectors that you have to worry about, and they're in different spots on the motherboard from the ITX. As long as you follow the manual, check all the videos on YouTube. There's several different tutorials out there. So I think you can do it, but if you have any questions, just let me know down in the comments. I'm happy to help you. Now, as for the gaming performance, this is one of my favorite PCs that I've had to test on this channel. All new hardware, everything just ran beautifully. Testing all the games on 1080p, they all ran beautifully and smoothly. Frame times were great on all games that I've tested, and they were run on high to ultra settings depending on the game. And I would be remiss to not think that this computer could even handle 1440p. I only tested at 1080p for this video. If you guys want me to test 1440p for a future video, let me know down in the comments if at all are interested in that. But I figured at this price point with this type of hardware, 1080p is where most people would be sticking. But if you are interested in 1440p games on this type of hardware, just let me know and I'll be happy to test that for you for a future video. All right guys, so I think that's gonna wrap up this video. If you liked it, give it a like. If you wanna see more from us, hit that subscribe button and the bell, and we'll see you in the next video.